This podcast is brought to you by Radio 786.
So, coal. We're going to talk about coal and this contradiction that we have in South Africa with respect to Israel and our delivery of coal to them. South Africa has taken a bold stance against Israel's genocide in Gaza at the ICJ, at the International Court of Justice. But we continue to export coal to the occupied regime. In the upcoming documentary, Fueling the Fire, South Africa's Role in Israel's Coal, is set to expose the depths of this dirty trade relationship and the activists fighting to end it. The film is at a critical stage and needs your support to reach completion, and we're joined now by co-producer Daniel Friedman. Good morning to you, Daniel.
Morning. Thanks so much for having me on the show.
Yes, thank you for joining us this morning on Radio 786. What inspired you to create Fueling the Fire, South Africa's Role in Israel's Coal, and what is the core message you hope to convey through this documentary?
I suppose what inspired us more than anything else is just hope, because these are very difficult times, and the only thing carrying many of us through is the idea that we can make it to the other side and create a better world. I remember personally, I attended the Jewish Anti-Zionist Congress in Vienna earlier this year, and I remember one of the politicians who spoke there from Norway said we need to think global, act local. And that inspired me a lot, because what he was saying is that we can aim all our anger at Israel, at Netanyahu, etc., but that's not necessarily going to do anything. A more useful way for us to aim our anger is at the people where we are, wherever that is in the world, who are enabling this to continue. And Francesca Albanese released two reports. The one named Glencore, because the one tackled corporate corporate complicity in the genocide, and her second report that she released more recently looks at countries and how they help fuel the genocide. And South Africa was mentioned specifically for its role in continuing to allow coal to flow for Israel. So we're inspired to try and change this. We're inspired more than anything else by just wanting to see an end to the genocide in Gaza. And I suppose it's inspiring working with the amazing activists that we've met. But in a sense, I suppose we're inspired by being activists ourselves, because this film blurs the lines between filmmaking and activism in the sense that we do have an aim, and that aim is to stop the sale of coal to Israel. Our core message of the film is simply that South Africa must stop fueling Israel's genocide.
Your film highlights that very stark contradiction, right? So South Africa condemns genocide at the ICJ, yet it continues to export coal to Israel. Why is this contradiction so significant in terms of South Africa's moral and legal standing?
Well, looking at it morally, I just don't think you can justify trading with Israel at this point, because you're allowing a genocide to continue. It's as simple as that. Of course, there are extra things. South Africa has a history of solidarity with Palestinians. There was collaboration between Umkhonto weSizwe and the PLO. They were allies. And of course, Israel and apartheid South Africa were very good friends indeed. But ultimately, we must sanction Israel not because of the shared history that I've just mentioned between South Africa and Palestine, but just to stop the continued erasure of the Palestinian people. So each of these people has a right to peace and dignity and safety, ownership, all of these rights that we hold dear as individuals. And morally, you just can't justify business as usual with a country which is so systematically denying a people their basic human rights. So that's the moral thing. And then legally, I would just say that I'm no lawyer or expert. I'm just a film producer. But as I understand it, there was the International Court of Justice ruling in July last year, 2024. It found that Israel's occupation of Gaza, the West Bank, Jerusalem, it's illegal. And it advised that Israel withdraw and pay reparations. And sadly, we've seen that the UN doesn't really have any tangible way of enforcing these laws. And we've seen the UN, the ICJ, the ICC, they've been shown, international law basically doesn't exist. This is what Gaza has shown, but that doesn't mean we must stop pushing for legal accountability. We can't stop, because by failing to sanction Israel, South Africa is in dereliction of its duty to act to end a genocide, as I understand it.
Yeah, a model quandary or conundrum. Can you explain how South Africa's coal directly supports Israel's military and the occupation infrastructure? In practical terms, how does South Africa's coal support that infrastructure?
So what's interesting is the same ICJ ruling, the one that I just mentioned, it specifically mentioned coal, and it called coal a dual use item. So what that means is that it can be found that coal is being used for both civilian and military infrastructure. So there is no question the coal that we send Israel is being used for their military. But I would mention that even if it was just fueling the civilian infrastructure, that's still wrong, because the civilian infrastructure we're talking about is on illegally occupied land. So even if the coal was only for civilian use, I would argue that we need to stop trading with Israel immediately. Unfortunately, it's not just for civilian use. As the ICJ ruling shows, it's a dual use item. That means it's used for both civilian and military reasons. And then on top of that, when we spoke to Haidar Eid, who is a professor from Gaza, he highlighted how Israel uses the electricity grid in Gaza almost as a tool of war, because they decide when Gaza is allowed to have power. They cut out the power in Gaza for long periods of time as a sort of tool to weaken the population of Gaza. So when you're sending coal to one country, which chooses how another people can use power and whether they can have power at all, I would say that's not justifiable. But and the coal that we sell, it's sold directly to the IEC. That's the Israeli electricity company. That's a state-owned entity. So we're essentially selling our coal directly to Israel's Eskom. And 12 to 17% of the entire electricity grid is powered by our South African coal.
Well, let's contrast that with Colombia. Colombia actually banned coal exports to Israel in 2024. This doesn't look good for South Africa. I mean, we talk a lot about our anti-genocide stance. We go to the ICJ, we make so much noise, and at the end of the day, we still continue with an export program to Israel. And if we look at it carefully, we need to look at those multinational corporations that are in the coal shipment business, perhaps organizations like the Glencores and the African Rainbow Minerals and whatnot. Who's benefiting here? I mean, Colombia banned those exports, and South Africa has not taken similar steps. So what does that say about our political will?
Yeah, that is very interesting. So we're part of the Hague Group. So the Hague Group is a group of countries who are overtly trying to end the genocide, and we're on it with Colombia, but we haven't taken the same steps. As you say, Colombia has enforced a coal embargo, but so now if you look at it, this coal embargo was not always effective. So for about a year after the embargo that was announced in Colombia, they were still selling coal to Israel at the exact same rate. And the reason why they were able to do this is corporate loopholes. And they're the similar corporate loopholes to the one we're dealing with in South Africa through companies such as Glencore. And it's very important to highlight that in Colombia, the same company is the one we're talking about, is Glencore. The coal that goes from Colombia to Israel is also through Glencore. But the difference is they have placed an embargo, and then in March, May, I don't remember exactly when it was, but President Petro from Colombia, he gave this very angry speech saying he would close the loopholes. He even threatened military intervention against Glencore, which is the main provider of coal, not only from South Africa to Israel, but from Colombia to Israel. And so he took a very strong stance. And since then, coal sales have dropped. Some shipments are still making it through, but it's radically reduced the amount. So as Colombia has dropped their sales, ironically, SA has capitalized on this, and we've sold more coal. South Africa has, so the amount of coal we sell keeps rising in the midst of this genocide. So what this says about our political will as a country is simply that we don't have any, because broad public gestures like the ICJ genocide case are amazing. I'm not saying they're not, but they need to be backed by action. And the biggest problem is that we see an almost two parallel governments from South Africa, because we have DIRCO, And Durko are making amazing. They are doing amazing things in terms of opposing the genocide. But then we have the DTIC, the Department of Trade and Industry, and it's almost like they're two separate governments, because the DTIC are all about just making money. They are not involved in this moral thing. And so Cyril Ramaphosa makes noises that make him sound like he's part of the Durko camp, but he needs to put his money where his mouth is, excuse the cliche, because behind the scenes, he seems to be definitely aligned with the DTIC in their continuing to sell this coal. So it's a hypocrisy that is extremely noticeable and that we need to do something about.
Your film features activists like Haider Eid, Roshan Dadu, and Zukiswa Warner. What role do these voices play in challenging the coal trade and holding corporations accountable?
So these are all great activists as people, but more than that, what's important to us is that all of them, if you look at it, are aligned with BDS, with the boycott, divestment, and sanctions movement. So this is a Palestinian-led call for boycotts against Israel, which is modeled in many ways on the movement that called for similar actions against apartheid South Africa in the 60s. And it's very important that the individuals are one thing, but the broader aim that we all have to see Israel isolated on the international stage is really the important thing. But especially when it comes to Haidar, I would single him out because he is a Gazan professor. He is an actual survivor of the genocide. He has lost over 60 family members personally in the genocide. And that is very important in our film because it humanizes the whole thing. And I almost hate using that term because people always say we need to humanize Palestinian people, and you shouldn't even need to. They are by default human beings, but there's been such a concerted effort to dehumanize them that this does need to be said. And when you speak to Haidar, you're talking to a person who's not only extremely committed to the cause, but who has personally suffered an incredibly depressing amount because of this genocide, and it's important for his story to be told. Roshan is the coordinator of BDS in South Africa, so obviously it's very important to talk to her. And Zukiswa is just an amazing activist who almost she'll say things to me like, let's find out where these next shipments of coal are and let's go. She is it's almost out of the question to her not to be doing these actions. And so all of them really add to the documentary. But as I've said, the biggest story here is all of our united support for boycott, divestment and sanctions, which is what is leading us to try and stop the sale of coal from South Africa to Israel.
Now, you touched on Glencore and African Rainbow Minerals. ARM is their symbol, I think. They're key players in this trade. What level of responsibility do they have or bear in perpetuating this cycle of violence?
So, obviously, I would say they have ultimate responsibility because they could make the stop. I think one of the biggest tragedies here is it's not the case that stopping selling coals to Israel would cripple these companies. They would easily survive it if they were to do this. But at the same time, Glencore, African Rainbow Minerals, these are corporations, and corporations are not moral entities, sadly, as we've seen. So the only people they are accountable to are their shareholders. They're only worried about the money. So we need government to come on board, and that's the reason why we are writing letters to government, we are targeting DTIC, we are demanding action from them because sadly corporations have to be forced to do the right thing. They won't on their own. But it should also be mentioned, Glencore's the problems with Glencore extend beyond this exact issue with Israel because they're also guilty of, violence against the environment, violence against their own workers and the vulnerable communities in South Africa that mine the coal are dealing with extreme health problems, living problems that are created by this mining. So yes, Glencore has a ton of responsibility, but like I said, they're not going to reach this conclusion on their own. We do have to force them, and for that we need government to join us.
Right, so it's 8:14, and we are in discussion with Daniel Friedman. Friedman, he's a co-producer of the movie or the upcoming movie "Fueling the Fire: South Africa's Role in Israel's Coal." So, Daniel, looking at South Africa's credibility now in terms of the world and on the world stage, South Africa continues to export this coal. What does that mean for our credibility in international law and for the broader struggle for justice in Gaza? I mean, coal is at the heart of fueling the entire engine that is Israel and the Israeli occupation force. And as you point out, coal is dual purpose, and I think it's just a semantics discussion around whether it's being used for military or for civilian. It's kind of hard to separate the two anyway in an integrated country or area like Israel. So what does it say about our credibility in terms of international law and the broader struggle for justice in Gaza?
Well, first of all, I'd say you're completely right about the fact that you're selling coal to Israel it's an affront to our values. When you look at South Africa and our own role and our own struggle with apartheid, for us as obvious allies to the Palestinians to still be doing this is hugely hypocritical. And it's just the case that we cannot get up and say that we are leading in terms of this issue globally as long as this coal continues to sell. And it's our aim as filmmakers to sort of put South Africa's feet to this fire. We will not let South Africa pretend to still be credible on this issue. It's our duty as filmmakers, and it's the duty of the activists we follow to force South Africa to live up to the values that it claims to represent. And so the aim of the film is to put that on display. So our government does not have the option to allow this hypocrisy to continue.
Help us with some of the numbers, if you can. The value of the exports to Israel are somewhere in the region of perhaps 70 to 80 million. Is that dollars, US dollars? Is that an annual number? It looks like approximately 400 to 500 kilotons of coal are shipped from South Africa. And South Africa remains among the top two suppliers of coal to Israel. And that's basically after one other country has banned exports. That's referring to Colombia now. But in terms of the numbers, it seems like a lot, but in the grand scheme of things, it doesn't seem like all that much. And you say Glencore and ARM, they could possibly weather that storm. They might not really harm the business that much if they decided to not sell to Israel.
Yes, well, so this is what we're saying here. So on the one hand, we're powering 12 to 17% of the entire electricity grid, but it was explained to me by a professor that this means that at any given time, it could be up to 50% of Israel's grid is powered by South African coal, because obviously this fluctuates depending on whether they're getting a shipment from Russia, whether Colombia is still selling. But it could very plausibly be a situation whereby 50% of Israel's entire power needs are being fueled at any given time by South African coal. So it would be huge for them. And the estimate is that it's between 12 and 17% of the entire electricity grid, but that to do a very conservative estimate, if we stopped selling coal, that would take away about 8% of their energy off the grid. And it's interesting to use the example of load shedding, because we as South Africans, we know exactly what it means to have power taken off the grid. We cannot claim that it's not a huge issue. We've had load shedding, and it's led to the closure of small businesses. It's led to incredible problems for people just in their daily lives. And so it would be incredibly effective to stop selling this coal. It would really interfere with Israel's day-to-day running, and also with their ability to wage this sort of genocidal war that continues. So it would be effective. But as you say, on the other side of things, the numbers are not such that if we were to stop selling coal to Israel, everyone would lose their jobs. We would suffer as an economy. There would be alternative buyers, and we would weather the storm. And so it's also important to note that it's not the average South African benefiting from the sale of coal. It is elite people who are benefiting from it, and only they would be impacted if we stopped selling this coal. And even then, these are very wealthy people who would find other markets for their coal. So, as you say, we are arguing that it would be a very small problem for South Africa to stop selling this coal, and a very big problem for Israel.
So let's get back to the movie, right, to the production that you're working on. You said the quality of the footage is incredible, according to you, and you've reached a point where you need a financial support. What will these, what will the funds specifically help you achieve, and how will it help you achieve the completion of the film?
Thanks for asking that. Well, when we started, we were almost being carried along on a wave of idealism, because we started by saying, should we film this protest? Should we speak to this person? And at that stage, it was only very, it wasn't set in stone that we were even making a full documentary. But at a certain stage, we realized we had the footage, we had the will, and we had the access to people that we could create a full-length documentary. And that's when reality hit us, which is that to create any film, there are certain things. So it's a bit boring even to describe, but it's things like storage, like server space, because what has happened is we have all of this footage on a home computer, which is now taking strain and could pack up at any minute. And so it's equipment, because if we're going to get out to remaining things, we can't really just keep doing it. We are relying so far on the goodness of people to serve as our cinematographers, to serve, and that creates a very interesting dynamic, which is that, ideally in a filmmaking scenario, we would like to pay people for their services. So that's another thing. And once the film is made, it's really a little bit worthless unless it gets out there. So there's also the thing about distribution. So to publicize a film, to get it out there, you do require funds. So we're a small and passionate team, but we realized that we could get this to a level that it's a broadly accessible and professional documentary completed. But to do that, we do need help to get it over the line.
And so for listeners who want to support the project, how can they contribute, and what impact will their donations have? You'll finish the project. Give us the timeline around it, and how do they access it once you're done? But more importantly, how can they contribute? Where do they go?
Thank you. So first of all, I would say that by the end of the year, this year, we are planning to have a cut that will be screenable by television. So what that means is that it will be between half an hour and 45 minutes, and we have various networks that we are going to try and flight this on, and so that's our first aim. Then there's the potential to keep going, create a 1.5 hour documentary, take it around the world, and in the process, hopefully take this issue from a side issue, this issue of selling coal to Israel, and make it one of the main issues. And in terms of support, if anyone does want to support, we are currently on BackaBuddy. So it's called Fueling the Fire, a documentary. The documentary is called Fueling the Fire. And if you search for Fueling the Fire documentary on BackaBuddy, our page should come up. Alternatively, I was hearing that Radio 786 would publish the BackaBuddy link on social media. So if that happens, that would be also a way for people who are listeners to find it. But for now, I would say anyone who wants to help, look for our BackaBuddy. That's what we're using to raise funds. And then also just to mention that on that page, on that BackaBuddy page, as well as on our Facebook, if you find it, or there's a YouTube promo. So what that is it's a 6.5 minute look at the it's almost a trailer in a sense. We've compiled all the footage so far. We've explained what we're trying to say in the documentary. And I think watching that promo, what we're hoping is people will say, okay, this is what they've managed to accomplish with no funds whatsoever. we see the quality is high enough that we think this project could really do something, and therefore let's invest a bit of money in helping them get it across the line. So what I would suggest for now is go to our Backer Buddy, watch our promo, and then based on that, see if you want to donate. Yeah.
So it turns out that the link has already been published. We are trying to stay one step ahead, Daniel. www.backerbuddy.co.za, and then it's campaign and Fueling the Fire, a documentary. The words Fueling the Fire is hyphenated, but as Daniel has explained, if you search for it on the Backer Buddy site, you will come across Fueling the Fire, a documentary. Daniel, as we round out to close out this particular segment, tell us, are there any other documentaries that are in the works for you? Have you guys completed anything recently? Is there anything else we can look forward to once you're done with this particular project?
We're hoping that this will be the start of many, but it's also just about living in the here and now. For now, we are fully focused on this project. So the people that we're working with are largely involved in the movement in some way. And there are so many different stories that need to be told. And the other day we were talking about trying to get to the West Bank, because obviously getting to Gaza at this point is impossible, but to try and get to the West Bank and hopefully create a documentary that involves speaking to Palestinians, speaking to Israelis about the West Bank, but who knows? All of this is conjecture, because if we can make this one documentary about the sale of coal to Israel work, then yes, I do hope it will be the beginning of many more. But one step at a time.
One step at a time. All right, that is film producer, co-producer, Daniel Friedman, and he's producing the film Fueling the Fire, South Africa's Role in Israel's Coal.
This podcast is brought to you by Radio 786.